So about the Myers-Briggs, the Myers-Briggs type indicator is it was really, I think, set up as a counseling test. So it doesn't have reliability and validity scales the way I'll say the whole word, the MMPI does, which is what we usually use in forensic settings in court. But the problem is that the Myers-Briggs, there's an enormous amount of data on lawyers in the Myers-Briggs, as well as other populations. So we can compare lawyers to general populations, we can compare lawyers to others, and we can compare lawyers to themselves and to law students. So there's at least maybe 12, 13 studies on the Myers-Briggs type of lawyers. And some of them are a little bit conflicting, but the one really consistent finding is that about 78 to 80% of lawyers, when you group male and female lawyers together, prefer thinking as a decision-making preference on the thinking-feeling continuum. So the Myers-Briggs has 4 continuum. It has the extrovert-introvert continuum, it has the thinking-feeling continuum, it has the sensing-intuitor think continuum, and then the judging-perceiving continuum. So it places you on these 4 continua. You place somewhere in that area, and it gives you a type so that you end up with a 4-letter type. You can be a ENFJ or an ISTJ, or depending on whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, a sensor or an intuitor, thinker or feeler, or a judge or perceiver. And what the data shows about lawyers is this thinking-feeling preference is really, really marked. And it's stronger for male attorneys than it is for female attorneys, but even the female attorneys are very strongly thinkers compared to the feelers. And you see that the thinkers are usually have higher grades than feelers as a generalization in law school, that there's a higher dropout rate among feelers in law school. They're just, it's sort of seemed, when you look at the data, you say to yourself, the whole law school and the legal profession is just geared for thinking and for the thinker preference. And when I use the Keirsey, which is sort of a mock-up of the Myers-Briggs. It's available online at Keirsey.com, and it's pretty readily accessible. It's a good, easy, quick way to figure out what your type is along these 4 continua. And when I give that to folks, law students or lawyers, and then split them up into groups, the whole room is practically thinkers, basically, and there's a few people that are feelers. So I mean, it really bears out in my experience that this is the way we are. In the general population, slightly more males than females are thinkers, and slightly more females than males are feelers. So I always think about that as the men are from Mars, women are from Venus kind of difference in the general population, but we're nowhere near as skewed towards thinking as lawyers are. So definitely, and it's a decision-making issue, whereas some of the other continua are more about how you interact with people or how you process information or how you work or something like that. So in terms of making decisions and what's important, it certainly suggests that the way lawyers make decisions might be really different from the way that non-lawyers make decisions, and that the 2 groups might not understand each other. So when non-lawyers look at lawyers and they say, what were the lawyers thinking? How could they possibly have done that? That doesn't even seem ethical. The lawyers might say, it makes perfect sense to us based on the code of ethics and the law and what we understand in our rational analysis, but they're ignoring the kinds of things that the feelers would look at, and the general population might very well be operating from more of a feeler perspective. So that makes a lot of sense to me in terms of the communications gap between the 2. Being a feeler in law school is an interesting, I guess, dilemma, perhaps, although most of the feelers I've talked to in the legal profession have reported great satisfaction in the profession, and most of them have found a way to practice law that really fits well for that feeling preference. And one of the things about feelers, at least according to the descriptions of feelers, is that they don't generally enjoy doing things they don't believe in, or that they don't reflect their own personal values, where the thinkers are more able to divorce their own personal values from what they're doing. So feelers tend to find themselves, or at least from my experience, tend to be in professions or niches in the law, where they in areas of the law where they can practice law or adjudicate law. A lot of times they're judges or guardians ad litem, where they can do things that are consonant with their values as feelers, where they can do things where they feel like they're doing something positive, or they're making a difference, or they're helping people, or they're preserving relationships, or they're protecting children, something like that. Or maybe even, I had one person talk to me about being an aggressive feeler as a litigator, and litigating from an aggressive feeling stance, and really protecting people and feeling really good about what that person was doing. So met a lot of interesting feelers in the law. In law school, I had a friend who, we were talking about this topic, and the person said, well, I was a feeler through law school. And she said, and I had a couple of choices. I could have gone underground and not let anybody know and pretended to be a thinker on the surface and really continued my feeling preference on the underneath it all. She says, or I could have gone to the other side and become a thinker and abandoned my feeler preference. She says, or I could have been very forcefully a feeler and just held on tightly to who I was throughout law school and let the chips fall where they may, kind of thing. So she decided to take the third route. And I said, and how was that? And she said it was very challenging, because she felt like she was swimming against the tide most of the time. But I think rewarding in the long run, because she knew that she knew who she was, and she was not swayed. And so she had that really strong moral compass, if you will, that we talk about our law students needing, and that lawyers need, basically, and she was able to hold on to it. If you look at Krieger and Sheldon's work about intrinsic values, I think a person who comes to law school with a feeling preference, that could very well be an intrinsic value that, buffeted by the first year of law school and all the pressure on grades and the pressure for performance and achievement, they could very easily drop that and say, well, I'm just going to start caring about grades, and I'm going to let go of all the things I intrinsically care about. And that's, I think, really dangerous for the well-being of that person. So I think that I like to encourage law students to hold on to their feeler preferences if they have that, and to recognize that not only is there a place for feelers in the law, but there's more and more today a place for feelers in the law with the comprehensive law movement and the kinds of emerging disciplines that we're seeing. So the introvert-extrovert difference among lawyers is a little bit confusing and conflicting, because you find different studies. You'll find extroverts have higher job satisfaction, but you'll find that introverts are more prevalent in the law field, and you'll find the studies kind of conflict on that. The same with the sensing intuitor. You'll find a slight preference for intuiting, which is the sort of the thinking big thoughts from the big picture and abstract ideas, versus the sensors, who are more concrete, and they like real things, the real table and real chair, that sort of, they're more into the tangible. But I think that the sensor preference would work better in trial practice, for example. And then the judging perceiving, they laugh about. Judges are the kind of people who their desks are usually really nice and neat, and all the projects are piled up one after the other, and they take one down and they work on that project till completion, and they finish it, and they check it off on their to-do list, and they put it back, and then they take the next one down, finish that one. They're bottom line, cut to the chase kind of people, whereas the perceivers like to keep all their options open at all times and not make any firm final decisions. And so they've got all the projects open on their desk all at one time, because they don't want to, they just want to kind of see what develops. So there's a slight preference, well, not anywhere near like a thinking feeling preference, but there's this preference for judging among lawyers, at least in the data. So in one of the studies, I guess the biggest study, finds that introversion, intuiting, thinking, and judging is the most common type for lawyers. But I have other studies here that show it's introvert, sensor, thinker, judger. I have another study that shows extrovert, intuiting, thinking, and judging as the most prevalent type. So you'll see some differences in the data. But one thing you see a lot of is the thinking, intuiting, thinking, judging combo. The thinking, judging combo. And what's interesting about the thinking, judging combination is that that's really highly prevalent among lawyers. It's also highly prevalent among top corporate executives. So what I took from that was that lawyers and top corporate executives speak the same language, but lawyers and other sorts of clients may not necessarily understand each other or communicate well.